Great, we've got people joining us all around the world. Just let everyone come in. It's going to start at 12:30 or a couple of minutes after. Just let everyone enter. Ross, what were you saying about Macquarie Bank then a minute ago? You're saying they've changed
Yeah. So on Monday, every brokerage in the country, I imagine, got an email or a message from the BDMs at Macquarie, basically saying they're changing their trust lending strategy.
Okay.
So we'll touch on it a bit today, but effectively what it means is they won't allow multiple trusts inside Macquarie like the good old days. So as of 5 p.m. today, that all shuts down, which is interesting.
Okay.
Because CBA made some announcements just after Macquarie made their announcement. So I have a feeling there's a bit of to and fro going on in the background.
Okay, interesting. So it's a very good time to be having this call in today. We've nailed it with the news release.
As long as you can get in by 5 p.m. today, yes.
If you can set up an application and sign all the paperwork and get it in by 5 p.m., you're good.
Yeah, perfect. All right, I think we've got people coming in. We've got a few more popping in. I think 1 more minute, and we jump straight into it. Guys, feel free as well throughout this whole presentation to leave any questions you have in the comments. I've got my team at MadeComfy answering to them. Chris, John, and Ross are also on standby to basically answer any queries you have. Of course, please, no question is a bad question or a silly question. So yeah, please fire away. All right, so let's get started. Today we're here, one of our MadeComfy series of webinars. So I've invited some of the top industry experts along to ensure that we unpack and really showcase the knowledge around the short-term rental space. And many people know Airbnb. Short-term rental is a lot bigger than that. So today we've got Chris Gray from Your Empire, who's built a $20 million plus sort of portfolio across his career. He's also, you might have seen him on TV before with Sky News. He's also an author of multiple investment books that I've loved reading when I ever have the chance. As I'm quite young in the career, it's a great advice in all those books. Part of John is also part of Chris's team at Your Empire. He runs basically partnership and the alliances. So he's a very similar role to me, but he looks after high net worth clients, ensures that Chris and the team are really delivering the results for the partnerships that they have at Your Empire. And basically any new people coming on board, he can link them with the right industry partners. And then finally, we've got Ross. Ross is a strategic broker and a mortgage broker in terms of working at strategic brokers. Sorry, got that all mixed up then. But he's also a financial strategist, and he has over 15 years of experience in the market. He's also a previous Marine. So he's very, 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 very regimented on how he does things, and he has loads of inside knowledge into this space. So, and then there's finally me, Thomas Wheeler. I'm head of partnerships at MadeComfy. I'm bringing in, as I said a bit earlier, the best in the business to come and talk to our clients and potential clients about Airbnb, and the strategy that holds. So today I'm going to launch with Chris. Chris is going to talk about his journey. He's recently joined MadeComfy with 2 of his properties in New South Wales. We're going to be looking at new strategies around what Chris describes as rent investing in one of his books, but how you can use short-term rentals to do that as well now, but also then unpack the best hotspots in the industry. While Ross is just going to touch upon how you can basically structure those portfolios and really ensure that you're set up for success from the beginning. So Chris, I'll pass it over to you, mate, and we can go from here.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Now, we've got 15 minutes. I want to try and impart about 30 years of ideas and experience to give you the golden nuggets. So in very, very short terms, I started investing at 22 in the UK. I semi-retired from full-time work in the corporate scene at 31. I had about $3.5 million worth of property then. Now I'm 54, so kind of 25 years later, then I've got a portfolio roughly around 25 million. So obviously most people want to find out what are the secrets, how do I get rich, how do I retire early, how do I have the cars, the holidays, and do whatever I want to do. And so that's what we're going to try and do. And so the main thing is most people are so worried about the investments that they're going to make and try and make the choices. But actually the biggest regret that most people have is that they didn't do more. They didn't actually make that decision in the first place. And that's the big thing. You've actually got to go and do something. So no matter what you're trying to do, you're never going to get 100% of the information. You're never going to get it perfect. I'm still learning 30 years later. But that's the thing, is you've got to go and take some action. So the great thing with residential property is, even if you make the worst mistake in the world, if you hold on long enough, generally you're still going to make money. Now, obviously, if you invest in mining towns and things like that, that's going to be a lot harder. And we'll just jump across to that next slide if we can. But it's actually not doing anything that makes the difference. So each year we survey about 15,000 people, and 99% of them say, I wish I bought more property, I wish I hadn't sold property, and I wish I'd done it when I'm younger. And so no matter what age you can do it, the sooner you can do it, the better. I'm actually paying my kids, 16 and 17 years old, I pay them $50 a month to read the books that I want them to read. Things like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, kind of 7 Steps to Wealth, obviously The Effortless Empire, all the various different books. I don't care if they're good books or bad books, or if it's positive cash flow or negative geared or renovations, just to basically build that experience. And if we go on to the next slide, you can see the difference it makes. Actually, I think we've got slides. Is the one just before that a graph, the reality check? Oh, that's it. Wonderful. And what this graph shows is, if you started off in, say, 2025, and you had, you were 20 years old, and you basically had all that time in the market, and let's just say the market doubles every 10 years, just as an easy example. Basically, by the time you're about 55, you're then going to have about $32 million worth of property. Whereas if you start 10 years later, it's not the $1 to $2 million you're missing out on, it's actually the 16 doubling to 32. So that's the big difference. And again, if you leave it another 10 years, it's not from 1 to 2 million you're missing out, it's the 8 to the 16 and the 16 to 32. So it's all about doing your due diligence early and getting all that action taken that will then lead you to actually making more money later on. So again, if we go on to the next slide. Okay, so there's lots of different ways of making money in property, and there's no right answer. There's pros and cons to all of these different things. So most of my portfolio is in buy and hold blue chip. And the reason we do that is, with the 500 interviews that I did on Sky News, the main thing I learned from all those economists was everything comes down to supply and demand. Just like when you're at school and you learned in economics, the basic laws of economics is supply and demand. If there's no more of something and lots of people want it and they've got money, the price will go up. And so what's very hard is, if you look at some of these remote areas, and there's a lot of people talking about regional properties and positive cash flow properties, is for a property there where you've got blue collar workers, for a property to go from $500,000 to $1 million and 1 to 2 and 2 to 4, it's really, really hard to try and understand how that person on that average salary is ever going to afford to then pay that $2 million that they're only paying for 500 before. Whereas if you look at these major capital cities like a Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, you don't invest in the CBD because there's no limit of supply. You can keep building these massive towers, and most Aussies don't want to live in one of those towers. But if you invest 5, 10, 15 Ks out, so like say in Sydney for the Eastern Beaches, the Bondis, Lower North Shore, so like a Manly or Neutral Bay, and Inner West like a Balmain or Annandale, something like that, typically they've got 3-story height limits. They're full of young people that haven't got kids, that haven't got big expenses and mortgages and things like that. They've generally got good jobs in the city, and they've got wealthy parents. And these are the people that can help property double from 500 to $1 million to 2 to 4. Because again, you get the Bondi Beaches, there's people spending $20 or $30 million on a penthouse down there. And so $1 or $2 million for the rest of Australia sounds like a lot of money, but in these suburbs, it's not. It's very, very affordable living. And we even see on the news these days, like 100 people queuing up to rent a 2-bedder in Bondi for maybe $800 or $900 a week, because they're sharing it with 2 or 3 others, and they're all paying maybe $300 or $400 each. So that's why most of it I put into the buy and hold. Obviously, if you can renovate and sell and do stuff like that, then that's cool. Off the plan typically is normally fairly risky. It's generally professional developers selling it to you. And then obviously you've got the Airbnb there. And so this is one of the things that I tried about 10 years ago, and it worked very, very, very well for a year, but then the market changed and it wasn't so good. Whereas now I've actually come back to it, and I'll share some of the numbers with you about why I'm actually going to do it. And so it's not something that I'll probably put 100% of my money in, But it's good because property is so expensive these days, the negative gearing is pretty high. So say if you buy $1 million property and you normally get maybe a 3.5 or 4% yield, that's 35 or 40 grand. But you're probably going to have about 10 grand of expenses. So your net rent is probably only going to be about 2.5, maybe 3%. So 20 or 30 grand per $1 million. But if you borrowed $1 million at 6%, say, it's costing you 600. So that property is costing you about 20 or 30 grand before tax, which is maybe 10 or 20 grand after tax. And so what the benefit of something like an Airbnb is, and obviously there's some risk there, it's never a perfect scenario, but the chances are you might be able to then get slightly higher rents that maybe you're actually then cash neutral. And obviously Ross can talk later on that your borrowing capacity, so your ability to buy multiple properties will depend on the income that you're going to get as well. So if we just jump to the next slide. Again, this is a classic thing, is so many people, so many of my friends, literally every day we get a call saying, is this the right time to be buying or is this the right time to be selling? And ultimately, it's always a good time. Now, obviously, that sounds like a cheap salesperson that's saying, yeah, sure, you should buy now. But I've bought in the booms, I've bought in the bus. As long as you're buying the right property in the right location for the right price, it doesn't matter if the market's going up or down over the long term. And we'll show you some graphs kind of in a couple of slides' time about why that makes a difference. Because typically we find that when we're buying investments, we'll generally never go to auction because we're trying to buy on that conservative valuation price of $1 million, whereas at auction, it might easily go for $1.05 million or 1.1. So if suddenly the market changes tomorrow, and the market can change pretty quick, if you've just spent $1.1 million on a unit that's only worth $1 million and the market drops 5 or 10%, it's actually $1 million going down to 9 or 950. You paid 1.1, so you've actually dropped 10 or 20%. But the reality is for the person that's paid $1 million, sure, maybe it does come off 50 or 100, but in reality, those good properties generally don't go down in value. It's the premium that disappears. So they're not getting that 50 or 100 grand extra at auction, but they're still worth that baseline of roughly $1 million. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. When I first came to Australia, I bought a property in Coogee. It's not this one, it's one literally the next level up, so exactly the same views. My one's Unit 5. I paid $360,000 in 999. Now, hands up, who would buy that now for $360,000? At the time, everyone said, you POMs have got no idea. Ross has got 2 hands up, which is good. They said, you POMs have got no idea. You come over with your £10 on your boat and you suddenly think you know everything about property. Don't you realize it's going to crash after the Olympics? You're absolutely stupid. $360,000 for a 2-bedroom unit. You're absolutely mad. And obviously, this is north facing. It's got views of the ocean. It's literally a few minutes walk down the road to the Coogee Bay Hotel and the beach and all the pubs and the rest of it. This one here, so on a lower floor, sold for 2.12 million, and that's November last year. So that's 12 months ago when the market's carried on moving. So the argument is that could be worth at least 2.2, maybe even 2.3 if I'm lucky on a good day. And this is the thing. Every person thinks property is expensive today, but when you look back in hindsight, it's suddenly cheap. And I bought 14 properties or something, and I'm sure in years to come, my kids will say, Dad, why did you only buy 14 properties worth 25 million? They were so cheap in those days. You should have bought 50 million, then we wouldn't have to work for a living. But I'll tell you, I'm going to get my kids to work. So that's why I haven't bought too many. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So I then had a chat with the guys at MadeComfy, and this is basically not the same unit. This is another one just up the street where I own the whole block, and I'm putting 2 of them up for MadeComfy, and we've actually just got the furniture quotes and just paid for that over the last couple of days. So my rental on it is $57,000, so just over $1,000 a week. And what they're saying here, and Tom, jump in if I'm not saying it correctly, a general short-term rental. So if you're doing it yourself or you're doing it with an average kind of company, you might be getting about 2 grand a week. So roughly about double the rental there. But with MadeComfy, because they're such a large organization, they've got all the technology, they really know what they're doing because they've got thousands and thousands of transactions. They think conservatively, I should be getting about 107,000. And if it goes really well, it's 121 or maybe even a bit more. Now, obviously, you've got to pay for things like Airbnb. So that's what I understand as being the platform fee. Obviously, you've got cleaning and some government taxes, or the government taxes. Actually, there's nothing there. That's surprising. I'm sure the government will do it at some point. But basically, my net rent will then potentially go from 51 after expenses to maybe 52, 59, 67, or maybe even more. So where I was saying before on $1 million property, and this one's actually probably, I think about maybe 1.7 million or something like that. That suddenly, if you're losing 10 or 20 grand or 20 or 30 grand, you can potentially turn that into a cash neutral property. And so that's the reason I'm looking to try and do something with MadeComfy. Again, I'm not putting 100% of my properties in there. So I still want to have some balance, some on the 12 months, especially summer to summer around those beachside suburbs. But again, if I can balance some of that negative gearing to turn it into some positive, I'm testing it on a couple of units. If that all goes well, then maybe in 6 or 12 months, when some of the other rentals turn around, then I'll put those across to MadeComfy as well and get some of that increased income. Okay, so just jumping on to the next slide there. A lot of people say, look, the time's never right. Everyone's always got an excuse of why they're not going to make a jump into the market. And they will say, oh, I need to buy my first home, or I need a bigger salary, or it's too risky, or I'm listening to all this stuff in the media with Trump or whatever else. There's always a reason not to invest in property. But when you look back, even if you're going through troubled times, it's never that bad when you look back in hindsight. And so the main thing is, just like that very first slide of saying most people's regrets is not doing it, is you've just got to jump in. Again, if I could have my time again to buy that unit for 360, and I bought, I think, 6 properties in my first 10 years from 22 to 31, I would have big borrowed or steal to buy even more of those properties for 360, because obviously it's now over $2 million. And again, the next slide will actually show us the graph over the last 40 years or so of obviously Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth. And you can see how strong Sydney's been in all that time. And it's all about consistency. There's obviously a lot of people that have been buying in Perth. And look, if you bought in Perth in the last 5 or 6 years, you've done incredibly well. Hopefully you've doubled your money. But the problem was from 2007 to 2021, it did absolutely nothing. And so where someone, if they'd invested in Sydney, every couple of years could have pulled the equity out and kept repeating. If you're in somewhere like Perth in that place, or maybe in regional towns and stuff like that, is you couldn't keep repeating. And this is the McDonald's thing. This is where you really make the money. It's in the compounding. It's buying one property, using the equity to double into 2, using that to get into 3, 4, 5, and 6, or however many properties you want. But ultimately, if you can get that consistency, and that generally happens from main capital cities. So it's not just supply and demand from the amount of properties that are available, it's also the amount of industry supporting the local economy. So obviously if mining goes down in Sydney, we wouldn't really know. Or if there's terrorism or tourism or interest rates, we're generally pretty solid in Sydney, then Melbourne, then Brisbane. But again, Melbourne, we can see obviously they've had some issues with the government there, and so they've had a bit of a fallback. We'll just jump on to the next slide there. Thanks, Tom. But look, that gives you a very, very quick insight into some of the things to think about. What you can actually do is if you click on the QR code there, or just go to yourempire.com.au start, you can actually download a copy of my main book that I wrote about 20 years ago. Nothing has changed. In 20 years, we've had GFCs, we've had Trump, we've had everything. Nothing has changed. All the numbers are exactly the same, apart from now, rather than average price property being 500, an average property for us these days is $1 or $2 million or something like that. So the book will give you some really good insights. You can get it on audio for free as well, so if you can just listen in the car. But that'll really give you a good heads up on all the other things you need to think about. And then obviously get some expert advice from MadeComfy. And look, we can have a chat through with you as well to talk with MadeComfy about what's the right kind of property. Because the only problem is with the units, sometimes you've got to deal with strata. And so this is where normally we buy a unit for an investment, but if we're then doing MadeComfy, we might go slightly further back into the suburb to maybe then look at a townhouse or a semi or something like that. But I'll hand over to John, and John can tell you a bit more about how we can help you maybe try and find that property. And then Tom can give you those stats on the kind of properties you're buying to see what your potential rental is going to be like.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And look, I guess Tom, if you want to go to the next slide. So the next few slides for me are just going to be really talking about where we're aiming. So we all saw that picture of Arden Street in Coogee, And to Chris's point, normally what we're trying to do is aim for areas where the supply of property is very short, but the demand is super high. And that's obviously whether it be a long-term side or holiday makers, or even corporate lets as well, where they're sending people interstate. We're seeing a lot more of that coming back after COVID as well, where people are traveling a lot more for work. The reasons for those is that will drive the long-term capital growth of the property, which to Chris's point earlier will enable you to go again should you wish to pull out equity and add to your portfolio there. So most of what we're buying for our clients over the last 20 years are second-hand properties. We try and stick away from those kind of shiny new properties, typically because they're not in the best locations where your holiday makers, your short-term rental and long-term people want to live, be it from a holiday side or a commute. And we see kind of more consistent growth as well on that side of things. We also focus on those kind of eastern cities as well, because they tend to hold up a little bit more against changes in the economy or changes in tourism as well. So think Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne. Perth's very different because it does rely on those kind of mining towns and resources. But again, it's obviously good from a holiday side of things as well. So we're also looking at places where competition is super high. And so obviously we want to try and avoid that, which I'll come on to in a couple of slides' time. But that's really that kind of advantage of surrounding yourself with, you know, a good broker like Ross, the guys at MadeComfy to give you the numbers, and obviously look from our point of view in terms of helping you go into find and secure the asset. Thanks, Tom. So typically what we're looking for, small blocks of units, height restricted area. To Chris's point earlier on, we have to be a little bit more careful nowadays with some of the strata where they don't allow short-term rentals. So make sure you're doing your due diligence around whether those unit blocks are actually allowing you to do so. What I'm going to put there is it's not too war and peace in terms of what it looks like. We're all adults, we're all young professionals, we all kind of live and work in the city. Those things there, double bedroom, parking, balcony, they're all things that we would know and like and want if we're going to go and stay somewhere, or if we're perhaps working interstate as well. So quiet street, you know, near facilities. You know, a lot of people, some of the times with the challenges on the regional side of things is you don't have those coffee shops, Uber Eats, your takeaways, all of that as well. But if your want and desire is for serenity, then you know, have at it from that side. So, you know, what's also good, and this is where the MadeComfy guys can come in too, is there any renovation potential? So perhaps can you find something and turn it into a 2-bedroom unit into a 3-bedroom unit? Or can you add a floor if we're going to be moving a little bit further out? Things like that as well. So you can always be looking at this as a long-term play, again, where the supply is short and the demand is really, really high. Thanks, Tom. So look, in terms of where we come into it from a buyer's agent point of view, we're very independent. We're not affiliated with any developers or anything like that. So we all buy property ourselves. So I was actually a client of your empire many, many years ago and now working in the business. So we're very independent in terms of what we're going to try and help you find. And again, it's working with a broker in terms of what you can borrow, working with the guys at MadeComfy to see what the numbers and return looks like, to then go out and find the asset that's going to help. So we very much cover New South Wales. We've got a team in Brisbane and a team in Melbourne. A lot of where we come into it is really giving you the opportunity before it comes on the market. So what we refer to as off market. It's paying what the general public wouldn't normally pay. One of the benefits of specializing in the areas that we do is we very much leverage the relationships with all the agents that we work with in those areas to get that inside information, to get there first, you know, perhaps even before it's come on the market as well. And then it's knowing how to play the game. Property over here, I often joke, is like a sport. You can tell from my accent, and our fellow panelists are all from the UK. It's super competitive in these areas. So we're almost that unfair advantage to you to help you avoid competition, avoid auctions, and make sure you're not overpaying, because you make your money in property when you buy and not when you sell. Thanks, Tom.
No worries, Ross. That's great. That's great insight from your empire. Thank you, Chris and John. All of that was amazing. And we'll touch about the figures later on. I'm just going to bring in Ross here. So Ross is from Strategic Brokers. He will help you structure, finance, how to pull equity and push it back into your portfolio. But I'll let Ross take it away from here. He's had some connection issues, so hopefully it's all sorted. He's not quite in the city at the moment, but yeah. Can you hear you?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a really good time for a internet outage, but there we go. That's Australia for you. It rains a little bit and then everything goes tits up, but hopefully everyone can hear me the whole way through. So yeah, look, my name is Ross. I'm a senior broker at Strategic Brokers. As Tom mentioned before, I'm a former British commando. That normally doesn't really mean anything, but for lending, it actually works out really well because we know how to improvise, adapt, and overcome, which is one of my favorite military mottos. Look, I'm a rent investor myself, same as John and Chris. I rent where I live, I buy elsewhere. And that's purely down to the figures and the numbers, which is what we'll get onto shortly. All of our, I would say a good 90% chunk of our clients are all investors. We rarely deal with owner-occupier clients. They can go to Aussie Home Loans or someone else. Really what people come to us for is a strategy and working with their accountants, financial advisors, and sourcing team. Really what we do is we strategize, how do we build out a portfolio for retirement or financial freedom? So if we go on to the next slide, I'll talk to you about what that means. Really what we try and focus on, especially when it comes to the short-term rental side of things, is most people leave a lot of yield on the table. And this is really crucial when you're building a portfolio, especially if you're structuring it as a business, which you should be doing when you're looking at short-term rental opportunities. So most investors are going to use normal funders. They're going to use your Westpac, St. George's, your NABs and all of that. I would say a good 70 or 80% of the funders that we use are tier 2 funders, purely because of the flexibility on policy, the leverage that you can get by using these lenders because they have lower buffers than the big banks, and the way that they will ignore debt that is structured correctly. And this is where the strategy piece comes into it. So what most people will do is they'll try and look for the cheapest possible rate. That won't build you the biggest portfolio unless you're making $5 million a year as a PAYG employer. So look, cash is king really with all of this. And the reason I say that is you need cash to buy more assets. And you need cash to buffer your assets in the short term. So generally, when we're structuring these loans, we're looking for interest-only loans with offset facilities. If you go for a fixed loan, most of the time it won't come with an offset facility, or it will come with a very limited offset available to it. This is a problem because really what we want is cash. We want to build as much cash as we possibly can in that offset account with the rent that's coming in, the short-term leases that we're getting, and we want to be able to use those returns to then put into new assets. So cash enables us to invest basically, which is why we always go for liquidity, interest-only loans with offset facilities if we possibly can. And that also helps with tax efficiency and being able to scale your portfolio. Tom, if you can just move on to the next slide for me. So this is really what we're talking about, right? Structuring your portfolio like a business and not like a normal borrower. You know, if you just want to have 3 assets, you know, by all means stick it all in your personal name, and that's probably where you're going to end, unfortunately, with your portfolio. But if you really want to structure things for retirement, you're going to need to build out your portfolio to a much bigger number. You know, if you want to replace your income, if you want to have $150,000 a year and a paid off, all your assets paid off, you've really got to think about how you structure it. And the problem is, if you don't structure it correctly from the start, you're going to get stuck down the road. So really what our team do is we try and look at the next 10 to 20 year picture. Okay, what's going to happen in year 5 if we carry on down this structure? Oh, we're going to get stuck with banks. And then unfortunately the portfolio will become stale and it won't be able to progress. So really what we look at is what's the end goal here? How do we get there? And how do we need to structure that at the start to ensure that we can get there? If the aim is to get to 10 properties, you're not going to get there by owning these assets in your personal name. You're going to need to structure them in entities like trusts or company structures or self-managed super funds, etc. And really, that's what our team are experts at doing. And the loan structuring itself. So if we just move on to the next slide, Tom. So this is just one very simple example just to show you guys. So obviously we spoke about leverage for liquidity, so interest-only loans with offset facilities to preserve cash flow. And then we want to structure it to scale. So I'll try and make it as simple as possible. Let's say that you had property trust 1. And you spoke to John and Chris and you said, hey guys, look, I want to get a short-term rental in Bondi. We're using the guys at MadeComfy, and I need to have an asset which is effectively trading profitably. What we would do is we would structure that asset inside of a trust. The reason we'll structure it inside of a trust is because if we can build a portfolio of 3, 4, 5 assets inside of that trust, what it then enables us to do, if we're doing short-term rentals and it's trading profitably, is we'll be able to recycle the debt from that trust, and then we can put it into trust number 2, but it will protect your borrowing power. So trust number 1 will get ignored. So all of the debt from those 3, 4, 5 assets that you have in property trust number 1 will be ignored, providing that it's trading profitably. You can recycle the debt from that trust, and then you can put it into trust number 2, and it will protect your borrowing power. So you can basically start again. So the banks will ignore the debt in trust 1, and then that will allow you to essentially grow the portfolio again and build another 3, 4, 5 assets into property trust 2. And you can essentially rinse and repeat that process. So really the structure is really key. So the example there, look, 1 or 2 assets, recycle the debt, revalue the properties, and then put them into a separate trust. It's not always the case. So it's not everyone listening to this is going to have the ambition to get to 10 properties. Some people are just going to have a couple, and that's absolutely fine. So what we tend to do is we'll introduce you to financial advisors and accountants, and they'll let us know if the strategy is for you or not, based on your goals. So if your goal is just to, have 1 or 2 assets, make 100 grand a year, that's absolutely fine. But if you're more ambitious and you want to grow to a 10, 20, 30 property portfolio, then this is really how everyone does it when they're growing sort of a big portfolio. If we can just move on to the next slide. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to rinse and repeat this. So we repeat and scale. And Chris mentioned this before, right? So what we'll do is we'll wait for the market to go up. We'll release the equity from those assets, and we'll use that equity to then buy more assets, and then maintain cash flow with the interest only offset account, and then you just repeat and scale from there. So that's really as simple as it gets. I try and make it sound as simple as possible. It's obviously harder in practice, and it takes a little bit longer than what I'm stating. But we have a lot of clients that have the ambition of maybe getting to 5 assets. And they'll say to me, Ross, I want to get there in 20 years' time. And actually, when they start the process, half the time they're on property number 4 or 5 by year 2. And actually it scales up much quicker, because equity grows quicker than you can save. So the hardest part is getting that first asset. But it gets much, much easier when you're in the game and you're playing the board of Monopoly, so to speak. Jump on to the next slide for me, please, Tom. So look, there's a strong appetite from lenders for Rentvestors at the moment. And the reason being is when you're looking at if a bank is trying to lend you money, an owner-occupier asset is seen as a liability, the same as a car is seen as a liability, the same as your credit card limit is seen as a liability by the bank. An owner-occupier asset is seen as a liability. An investment asset has income linked to it. It also applies negative gearing. So the borrowing power on investment properties is much greater than what you receive when you've got an owner-occupier asset. That's actually weighing you down 9 times out of 10 when we're talking about a portfolio. The second thing about renting, which some of you might do or might not do, is that if you run a business and you're watching this, you know that you can deduct around 20% of your rent against your company for office space. Obviously, this isn't accounting advice, but generally that's what you get on an annual basis. So it's definitely geared towards rent investors or investors. And really what we see is that there are one or two banks, major banks, that play well in this space for this type of short-term rental strategy and structuring these as a business. But really the non-bank space is where we see most of this really taking off. So there's lots of really good banks at the moment, what we call tier 2 funders. And these guys are only 0.2 to 0.4% higher than a normal bank, but they're giving you 2% buffers, so much stronger borrowing power than a mainstream funder. Mainstream funders will give you 3% buffers, so the borrowing power is much less. Some of these banks, if you do it through a trust strategy, they will give you triple the borrowing power. So one of the banks might give you $400,000 or $500,000 in lending, the mainstream funder for a trust strategy process. Some of these non-banks are giving you 1.2 million in borrowing power, and it's purely down to how they manage their policy and their servicing calculators. So it's not to be scoffed at when you hear banks that you've never heard of and they get mentioned to you as a product or an offering, because really what we're trying to do is scale a portfolio. Paying the extra 0.2 to 0.4% is worth it when you're gaining X many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in equity. So that's just a really key point there. The non-banks are doing much better than the big banks in this space. Moving on to the next slide. So look, strategy to settlement, really what we do is we help portfolio structuring. That's really what we're the best at. We're a solution-based brokerage. If you're coming to us for the cheapest rate, don't bother. Go to Aussie Home Loans and get it from them. Really what we want to try and do is we're trying to make people wealthier. And we're working with sourcing agents, short-term management rental companies, and accounting firms and financial advisors to really model your future. And that's what we do. So we put proposals forward. We give you lots of different scenarios. Most people will call us with something in mind. They'll talk to financial advisors and ourselves, and suddenly their strategy gets flipped on its head. So really it's the plan, the structure, getting you approved, checking these lenders will give us what we want up front to save you the decline later on down the line. And then what we do is we review your portfolio for you. So we review the portfolio every 6 to 12 months. Or if you're more aggressive, like some of our clients, will be reviewing your portfolio every 8 weeks. And really what the whole aim here is to build you a retirement strategy that actually works. So that's what we do really, and that's the key thing here. So if we're sort of looking back, just trying to recap what we talked about is cash is always king, interest only with offset accounts, thinking about the structuring of the loans and how they are they're pre-assessed before going to these banks, making sure that we think long term over the next 10-20 years, and we don't just go with the big banks, because they're the ones that are probably going to get you stuck later down the line. And I don't think Chris actually has a single loan with a big bank, so you might be able to touch base on that, but I don't think you do you?
No, I left private banking years ago. Everyone thinks it's an amazing thing to be in private bank, but it's the worst thing, because like commercial loans, they'll come and assess you every single year, and if something's changed, they can collapse your whole portfolio. So can be a nightmare.
Yeah. So look, really that's a wrap for me. But I'm happy to answer any questions towards the end after Tom's finished his piece. But yeah. Well,
thanks, Ross. That was super insightful. And you want to touch on anyone on this? I think this is everything here. Well, look, thank you so much, Ross. That was, I guess, the main takeaway is liquidity and cash is king, which is where I guess short-term rentals come in. So the short-term rental market, as many of you on this call have already know and educate yourself on it, is basically quick turnover of guests, high intensity of different tenants, or we call them tenants, we call them guests in our industry, and rollover, and really driving the highest yields possible of that asset, which is going to help Ross basically keep getting you more and more assets and building those portfolios. So today we're going to go through in the New South Wales where our data is showing the highest yielding properties are. We're looking at 2024 to 2025, and basically we'll uncover the main markets. Before we jump in, most of you already know MadeComfy by being on this webinar and looking at research in the background, but who we are. So we've been, since 2015, the leader in the market, the most awards won, and really the ones innovating within short-term rentals. We have an average of 4.7 average review across all our booking platforms, as you can see at the bottom of this slide. We are across many different booking platforms, not just dependent on Airbnb or booking.com, but across a whole array of different basically booking channels, which many of you would have used probably. We have recently just been acquired by the Brisbane Group. This is the world's largest, or one of the world's largest short-term rental professional managers and tech stack behind our business. We're basically now plugged into a global network, which no one else in the Australian market has, really giving you access to the global sort of travelers, corporate rentals and the bookings that come with that, with the GDS system that we've just recently been plugged into. So at the moment, we're able to now offer our clients, like Chris, the opportunity to have the global sort of reach for your portfolio. This makes you more competitive on those booking channels, and which really drives the highest yields possible. We are also one of the only short-term rental management companies trusted by a lot of the high street real estate brands. So we partner with the likes of Ray White, Hardcourt, LJ Hooker, the list goes on, One Agency and McGrath, for example. We also have, as you can see from today's webinar, a lot of corporate relationships and partnerships with like share stakeholders across the real estate industry. With these exclusive partnerships, we can really drive as highest yields possible for you. So let's just touch on here the size of the short-term rental market. So as you can see there, the hotel industry is around about 1.2 trillion from last year's sort of stats. Short-term rentals, you can see, is in Australian dollars here, 214 billion in size and scale. On the right-hand side, which is the main sort of analysis we want to look at, is that the market is growing between 22 to 24%. Next year, we're seeing already it's a growing trend, and it's growing already with a global sort of travel that's coming back to Australia, around 24% growth in short-term rentals. And this is sort of industry and accommodation type really now cements itself as number 2. But we're going to be seeing more and more professional sort of developments now being converted into these sort of accommodation types, purely because of what we've seen so far. Cash flow is key here, and also the yields that we are now generating for shareholders and our clients. So New South Wales has about 55,000 active listings at the moment. So we now can move forward and look at why people use us as a company over other sort of property managers, but also long-term property management. So from our clients, 57% of our clients use us to maximize the return. As Ross touched on, cash is king earlier, really driving the highest yielding properties and cash flow. Another 28% are using for flexibility. So we allow at MadeComfy you to use your property and investment when you want. So we can even have investors that maybe come into the city like Ross when he has bad Wi-Fi days and come and use his property and basically, use it on the weekends, let's say, or even during the week. And the weekend he rents it out for tourists to come and stay in, or for 1 or 2 nights. So a lot of people want to use a property as a flexibility investment, which you don't get on a long-term strategy, as you well know. And then 15% of our clients might be a bit like a financial advisor, like when they go, I'm going to do my investments myself, but then realize how difficult it is and how stressful it is. And they want the professional in the market with all the backing, the financial security of having the biggest player in the market behind you. So 50% of them are doing it themselves, and they swap back to us. A lot of clients we speak to go, I'm going to go and do it. And then they come back within 6 months after they might have had that one guest who left the keys on a night out at the pub and they're now locked out, right? So that's what they want, a professional manager in play. So moving on, this analysis today basically looked at the main sort of New South Wales markets that we're seeing high growth in, the best yields, but also showing you the whole array of top markets that I know Chris and John have touched on that their clients are looking to purchase. And this is why we're going to go through them today. So on average, we're seeing an 8.6% yield return across all these markets. We look at the yield gap, so we'll touch on that a bit later, around about 4.3% yield gap between the long-term rental to short-term rental yield of that property. We are seeing today, I'll present these markets in a minute, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, but I'll dive into those markets in more detail. Some of our markets that we're operating in, due to our really strong corporate rental and corporate strategic partners we have, are seeing about 14.2% yield returns on that, which is, as I know Ross and John and Chris would say, pretty special. So I want to understand the data here for you guys. So I've basically just summarized here the key sort of data points we look at. So occupancy is basically the percentage of available nights that is booked out. Okay, so we roughly aim for 72% at MadeComfy through our dynamic pricing, trying to minimize any property burnout that might happen with guests constantly coming in and recycling. We think we have this dynamic pricing system. So this links to the ADR on screen right now. So we almost like when you're booking your flights to go away, or when John, Chris and Ross are looking to go out to the UK for a bit, finding the right time to book that property will fluctuate in pricing. We have the same internal systems with our Prism group, basically running those numbers, ensuring your property's booked out without, I guess, the property burnout that we don't want to see. And then we got the short-term rental growth yield. So obviously you will know that, guys, but the annual return on that investment and the yield gap is the difference between the long-term rental yield and our short-term yield. And the median price for today's purpose, we've used realestate.com.au to show the median prices of each suburb to basically give you those overall figures. So moving on. So here's a summary of some of our best performing markets that our data has shown from 2024 to 2025. You'll recognize a lot of these suburbs. Some of these are blue chip areas like John's saying, but some of them aren't. So surprisingly, to John and Chris when they reviewed this, Green Square and Zetland was up there. So obviously there's a lot of new builds going on there. But the reason behind that is because of our properties and the wider Airbnb market. We actually are seeing them for high cash yield. It's extremely impressive with a yield gap of 9.4%. This is to do with our clients now being plugged into the corporate industry partners. We have 800 corporate industry partners that basically feed in those clients on a continuous basis when they're relocating, whether they're flying interstate, and we're putting those over extremely highly. So the ADRs on that property do fluctuate, but because it depends on the property, and as I showed earlier with Chris's analogies, you have comfort, you have the optimal, and you have these different levels of property. What we're seeing is about a 9.4% yield gap. Then we got, as you see, Manly. I know John and Chris love this suburb, and it's got really high, a lot of interest in that area. ADRs, as you can imagine, extremely high, extremely popular location with constant tourists coming through it, constant demand, not a load of surplus of properties and accommodation types, limited high-rises in the area with these high-rise hotels. So Airbnb and Booking.com are the first for people to go and look. And even people going on Google and searching where best to stay in Manly, you'll see MadeComfy's pop up there. So we're seeing around about a 7.2% yield gap against the long-term rentals. Even as the long-term weekly rent is really high, we are seeing those really high ADRs. Then we've got Coogee, where Chris has mentioned earlier, Blue Mountains, Glebe, Port Macquarie. Feel free to review these. We're going to dive in a bit deeper now into the top premium locations. So I've touched on Green Square and Zetland. Crescent Heads, we're seeing extremely high yield sort of gap there with regards to, obviously, the buy-in's a bit lower than it is in other areas like Manly and Coogee, but we're seeing a constant flow of guests into that location. We cover that area at MadeComfy, and we see constant sort of bookings coming through. However, occupancy is lower than the main urban hub spots that we see here. Although we're seeing bigger like families booking there, booking for longer durations than 3 to 4 night stays with maybe 1 night switchover. So we're seeing those high sort of turnover of guests in that region, especially in peak seasons. We're also seeing that a lot of corporates are going down there. A lot of digital nomads like to go into the area. It's got great surf. It's also an affordable entry point for the investors. So it's a great market to look in, and Chris and John will definitely help you there. Manly, as just touched on a minute ago, is also performing very well. Into more hotspots with a yield gap of 3 to 5%, which is extremely impressive. This is what we try and aim for all our clients in comparison to if they were going to use their property on long-term rental. So as you can see on the screen, I won't touch into all of them, but Bondi, I know John loves Bondi as a typical POM. It really in price about 1.1 million. This is for an apartment unit. I know Chris and John touched earlier saying make sure around strata. We're all across that at MadeComfy. We will help you and comply with that. So if you ever have property in mind, send it into our team later on and we can have a look at it, make sure it's certified for short-term rentals, and if not, point in the right direction for where you need to go and apply for that. We see Newtown on screen, an amazing place, up and coming in terms of corporates and startups area in the city. We're seeing a lot of influx of corporate clients wanting to stay in the area with good access to the city. Kensington, even Wollongong with the surf, as you can imagine, the amount of people weekend escapes we're seeing. It's a great location. And we have the Blue Mountains, obviously a stable place for short-term rentals. Then it jumps into compliance, right? So a lot of people use MadeComfy for cash flow and the highest yields and generating and adding to their portfolio. It's also people use this because of the compliance in this area. You get the best rewards, but you also want to make sure you don't take any risks. So that's why people come to us. So on screen at the moment, you can see there's a nightly cap. So that is 180 days in Sydney. And in Byronshire, in Byron Bay, 60 days if unhosted. What that means is that you can only rent out on these platforms for 180 days, under 21 days. So what we do at MadeComfy is we take those 180 days, our data team, Prism, we basically look into which are going to be the highest ADRs. And then from that, we determine, as Chris will know, he said the sales pitch before, we will determine which nights and dates we need to rent that property out on Airbnb. So as you can imagine, New Year's, amazing, Kaji. Then you got it, if not, let's just say over the Easter period, we want to ensure that we can then make sure those booking spaces are open with that dynamic pricing. We then plug in for the rest of the years, we will look at corporate rental strategy, plug those in, plus also set up your listing to really attract those longer bookings. So whether that's, as Ross will know, work from home space with really fast Wi-Fi, so you don't have any Wi-Fi outages. I keep bringing you back, Ross, sorry, mate. Yeah, any of those, we really want to just make sure it's set up for success. So that MadeComfy, it's not like you give it to us and we leave it and we just hope. No, we do all the professional listings for you to ensure that you get that consistent occupancy rate throughout the year, okay? With anything in Sydney, as you can see on screen now, there is a registration fee. It's only $65 the first year and then $25 annually after. That basically registers it and makes sure it complies with the local New South Wales City or Sydney Council. So on screen right now, I can see we've got 10 minutes left, but I'll just jump into a customer success story for last year. I chose Bondi because this is somewhere in eastern suburbs that Chris and John really do cover really well. But as you can see on screen now, I wanted to show you a sort of roughly the investment type that we love at MadeComfy. So this 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom unit sold, indicated price around about $1 million and $40,000 back in 2022. We see fluctuations in occupancy, but this is really well sort of received this on the market. So we see an average of 84% occupancy rate last year, with the average daily rate of 260. So that's the same as getting like a premium hotel right in the city of Sydney, but you're trying it on Airbnb and across all our short-term rental like setup. Whether that's attracting a couple for their stay, we even put a lovely sofa bed into the listing to make sure you can drive families to it if it needs to be. And that's when you can really unlock, with our expertise, the higher yields and the highest average daily rates possible. On the market, this is after costs and fees and management fees associated with it. We're roughly on a weekly looking at 765 to 780. We try to get the latest weekly long-term rents provided to that. And as you can see that over the year on the left-hand side, the short-term rental is significantly higher in the increase across that whole year. This is net as well. This is after our fees at MadeComfy. So we're looking at around 63,000 on a short-term rental versus 39,000 to 40,000 long-term rent. A lot of people say, oh yeah, but you don't take the risk on board of the guests. Don't you worry, because we have all of the team in place to limit any risk associated with that. So we have a whole guest team vetting checking system that looks at the guest to identify who will be the right client for that property. You can decline yourself as a landlord in the dashboard. Limited people do, no one really does that. And we basically look into that. And then we've got on the yield difference here of 2.37%. So although you think minimal, as Ross said, cash flow is king. You need to get over that 2% growth and profitability of that. This could be the game-changing difference. Choosing that right management technique could really unlock adding more assets to your portfolio and more assets to your long-term growth. And as Chris said, maybe your children might even need to work next day, or sorry, next couple of years. So this is on screen. We can click in now and show you the dashboard here. If you guys can see this, we will just jump into the dashboard. And I think there's a lot of questions coming through, which I'm excited for the Q&A. So on screen here, you can basically search with our assistant. So when Chris and John look for a property, I'll send you access to our dashboard later, but basically on screen, you can scan, and we have a free tool for you to compare long-term rental yields versus what it would be on a short-term rental yield. So on screen, you find a property with Chris and John. Feel free to either send it through to me at my email address at tomwheeler.com@madecomfy.com.au. And we can basically identify and look at the projections of that property for you. So you can be rest assured that with all three brands together, this is the right investment. This is the right strategy for you. We sometimes just tell my clients saying this is not the right location. This is not the right strategy. You can do better long-term rentals. But with majority of our clients, you're seeing a higher yield gap and extremely strong cash flow with short-term rentals. So that's for me. So feel free to scan that and use that tool. I guess, John, Chris, and Ross, do you have any questions for me on these quick figures?
No, I think it all looks, excuse me. I think it all looks good. And I think the balance for people to have is if they're investing purely for cash flow, then obviously go for those high rental yields. If you're then doing it for a lot of people is the capital gains, it's then the location that's the most important. And then it's the in-between is finding a bit of a balance. So where are you going to get good capital growth with not a large supply? So with the green squares, sure, great for the rentals, but there's obviously thousands and thousands of apartments, so you may not get the capital growth in those areas. So it's trying to find the right balance for you that works in with the bank and obviously with your long-term financial plans.
Yes, for sure. John made it clear, said that to me when he saw the presentation. He was like, look, Green Square, really interesting area. Obviously up and coming new developments. There's a lot of stock in that region, and not many people are doing our strategy in those locations. And also with regards to Green Square, a lot of the time, a lot of these big new developments, they require a professional manager in place to run those Airbnbs because they don't want to obviously upset the rest of the residencies in those new buildings. So please do reach out if you are looking into this space, just to understand what is allowed in each different unit.
Yeah, I think just to add to that as well, and Ross might be able to talk to this, is with some of those bigger, some of the areas, I guess, with a lot more of the newer developments like a Zetland or Green Square, is some of the banks don't like to lend against them because of the volume of property there as well. So it's worth having a chat with your broker and kind of comparing notes in terms of, are the banks happy to lend against a place in Coogee or Bondi or Crescent Head or a Zetland or a Green Square as well, because again, that's going to be the vehicle that you want to leverage off.
Yeah, that's a key point there, because all the banks have what's called a postcode lookup tool. So you just need to check before you buy something to make sure that it's in the right catchment zone for the bank. And the bank might still be interested in lending you money in that postcode area. It just might be at a lower LVR level. So you might not be able to go up to 90%. You might have to have an 80% LVR or a 70% LVR to get the asset. But it's something worth considering. And just touching base on the figures there, a very simple way to analyze whether your accountant is probably happy to sign off that your trust is trading profitably for one of these assets is generally you need the rental yield to be about 2% higher than the interest rate. So if interest rates are at roughly 5.5% at the moment, you're going to need a 7.5% yield. And that's with a 20% down payment, which is the average across the board. If you've got a 30% deposit, great, it's probably trading profitably from day one. But generally speaking, it's a 20% deposit, and 2% above the interest rate will give you that magic tick in the box to say that you can ignore the trust and buy another asset in a separate entity. So just a point to add there.
Yeah. I guess thanks, Ross. That's really interesting. There's a couple of questions I can see with regards to in the comments. So I might just touch on those quickly. I don't know who's looking at this. We're looking at anonymous attendee here, but I have a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment in Brookvale area. Would Airbnb work there? Yes. Short answer, yes. We have a lot of clients in the region. Great location, great access to Manly, freshwater. We would identify the best way is to send in the address with us. We can do the whole appraisal for you, looking at competitor Airbnbs and short-term rentals in the area versus the long-term rentals here. So yeah, please do reach out. With regards to Robin, the customer success mentions 84%, but nightcap is only approximately 50%. Yes, so what we're doing across the whole day, so the whole year, is that 84% is the whole year. So what we're doing is corporate rentals being plugged into that. So 50%, we will basically try and fill out those 180 days at 100% occupancy. The rest of the time, we would look, obviously, filling in these longer 21-day bookings in corporate rental strategy. It works really well for our clients across the country, not just all in urban hotspots. Any other questions, Chris and John, from Ross, from you? If not, it's just coming up to 1:30, and I know a lot of people will be getting lunch or need to jump on afternoon meetings. Feel free, please, everyone who's attended the webinar, we also will send you the slides after for you to review and have. Please reach out to any of us. I'll send you the contact details of Chris, John, and Ross, and myself. We at MadeComfy work very closely with these guys, and we will all be able to help you on your property journey. Ross will structure it, Chris and John will help source it and give you all the expertise the last 25 years. And we will be able to give you the latest data, appraise it, and a long-term optimization of that unit and asset. Thank you so much, Chris, John, and Ross, for attending. Appreciate all your time spending talking to us. And have a lovely evening. Okay.